In his paper, The Least Harm Principle may require that humans consume a diet containing large herbivores, not a vegan diet. Stephen L. Davis argues for, well, just that the least harm principle, that is, the principle that says that we should minimize the amount of harm we inflict on sentient beings, implies that we are morally obligated to kill and eat large herbivores, such as cattle, instead of eating an entirely plant-based diet. Since it was first published, this provocative paper has focused attention on a largely ignored source of animal suffering, namely the harvesting of crops such as wheat. Fields of wheat are full of animals, birds, mice, rabbits, and much more, yet those animals don't magically disappear when harvest time comes. Unfortunately, many of those animals are killed as farm machinery makes its way through the fields, often in quite gruesome ways. What this means is that even though you might not realize it, when you buy bread at the grocery store, you are purchasing a product that is implicated in the suffering of animals. Okay, so what are we to make of this? Does this mean that we should stop eating bread? Does this mean that it's okay to eat meat after all, since we're going to be causing animal suffering no matter what we choose to buy at the grocery store? What conclusion should we draw from this? At this point, Davis appeals to a remark by the influential animal rights advocate Tom Reagan, who we'll be reading next week. Reagan writes, "Whenever we find ourselves in a situation where all the options at hand will produce some harm to those who are innocent, we must choose that option that will result in the least total sum of harm." Now, Reagan's not a utilitarian, as we'll see when we read him, but the principle that Reagan expresses here, the least harm principle, fits quite naturally with utilitarianism. Suppose that we accept the least harm principle. The question then becomes, what is the best way of reducing animal suffering when you're at the grocery store? Even if buying bread supports bread producers who cause animal suffering, maybe the bread producers cause less animal suffering than the producers of, say, factory farm chicken do. One thing that Davis does in this paper is to argue that when we run the numbers, a diet that includes some meat, especially beef, turns out to be preferable to a vegan diet. Davis's math is controversial. I won't go into the details, but if you'd like to read more, then a good place to start is with Gavrik Matheny's response piece, Least Harm, A Defense of Vegetarianism from Stephen Davis's Omnivorous Proposal, which we've linked below. Instead, I want to draw your attention to one interesting suggestion at the end of Davis's paper, which readers often forget. In the section entitled Other Alternatives, Davis considers a few alternatives to the omnivorous diet that he prefers, and discusses whether those would cause less harm. The third suggestion that Davis considers is the following. A third alternative would be to eliminate intensive agriculture altogether and have everyone produce their own vegan diet on small plots of land using no-till production systems to reduce killing and harm to animals of the field. I believe that this system would also be unpractical and not viable. The human populations are too large, land is concentrated in the hands of the few rather than many, and social systems would need to revert to those of primitive cultures. It seems clear that if I choose to grow all of my own food instead of shopping at a grocery store, then I would be reducing the amount of animal suffering that I support. Of course, Davis is right that this sort of solution won't scale up. After all, there are plenty of people, myself included, who don't own land, or at least don't own enough land to grow all of their own food. But even if that's right, there are lots of people with all of the resources that they would need to grow all of their own food. If minimizing the amount of harm that one causes to animals really is an ethical imperative, then would those people be morally required to grow all of their own food? And would the rest of us be obligated to do whatever we can to acquire the resources and knowledge necessary to do so? These are interesting questions that Davis's paper raises, but which haven't been given the attention that they deserve.